All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. Are you going to kick us off?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for being here today. Like I said earlier, my name is Lekki Shupek. I'm North Carolina State Director for All on the Line. And we're here because every 10 years, our state is required to redraw its districts, redistricting, and we are in it right now. The districts that get drawn this year are going to elect people who will represent our communities in state legislature and in Congress for the next 10 years. And they're really going to determine a lot about what happens in our state for the next 10 years. We believe that the people of the state deserve a say in how those lines are drawn. And we're here today because we want to help you craft a public comment that you can submit during this process that will be effective and help protect your community and make sure it's fairly represented.
And just for folks who might be new to the space, I see some new names, I think. All on the line, and I should also say first, my name is Bree Pro. I'm the digital organizer with All on the Line North Carolina. I use she, her pronouns. And All on the Line is a 501c4 campaign. And we exist to bring citizens across every issue together to raise awareness about the harmful impacts that gerrymandering has on our policy, and to create and encourage participation in the redistricting process that's happening right now.
All right, so as far as what we're doing during this training, we'll do some quick introductions in the chat, walk you through some of the basics of redistricting, just, so we provide a baseline, everyone knows what we're talking about. We'll talk about why public testimony is important, what does an effective public comment look like, how to write that comment. We will share some examples with you of testimony that meets those sort of effective guidelines. And we'll go over some tools that and resources that you can use to help you write your comment. We'll also have time for some Q&A at the end to ask stuff about putting together public comment or other things about the redistricting process.
So first, we want to hear from y'all, know a little bit about who's in the room, who's in the space. So if you would, please put in the chat your name, your pronouns that you prefer, and your location, where you are joining from in the state, or if you're outside the state, that's great too. So name, location, pronouns, and then finish this sentence. Fair maps look like what? What do fair maps look like to you? We love this part of the trainings. We've done a couple of these already, and it's really great to see what fair maps look like to people. It's like inspiring because we know what fair maps look like. And that's how we're going to get them, is by knowing what we're looking for. So thank you for folks who are dropping in the chat. Lisa in Alamance, yay, there's a training in Alamance this week. And Ronnie, I hope I'm not butchering your name. There is also a hearing in Durham this week, so glad you're here. And fair maps look like equity and justice. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, Joya in Wilson County. I hope that you're able to make it to the Pitt County hearing this week. Fair maps look like transparency and equity. Yeah, absolutely. Jim in Greensboro, hi. Looks like a cohesive community. Right, it looks like fair maps look like communities, respecting communities, cohesive communities. That's great. Please keep them coming, y'all, if you can. We will keep going.
All right, we will do a quick redistricting 101, because not everyone is as weird and obsessed as we are, apparently. All right, so we'll just go over some important definitions. What is a district? So a voting district is basically you take the population of an area and you divide it up into equal districts, and each of those districts is able to elect a representative of some kind. So for instance, here in our state, we have both a state house and a state senate, and our state is divided up into those districts and need to elect those officials. So redistricting itself is what happens every 10 years. We have a federal census. So the census is taken of the population of the whole country. And every 10 years when the census is over, we use those numbers that come out of the census to redraw our districts so that they are representational of what the population looks like then. So over 10 years in North Carolina, our population has exploded and grown so dramatically. And so since districts have to have roughly equal population, we have to redraw our districts to account for those changes.
So to give you all a sense of the timeline that we're working with, you know, as like I mentioned, this happens every 10 years following the census, and the last decennial redistricting, which happened in 2011, took 4 to 6 months. Because of the census delays, our process is going to take 6 to 8 weeks, which is very compressed. We are currently in September, as you all know, and we have just started the hearings, the public hearings that have been scheduled. There are only 13 hearings scheduled before the maps are drawn, all of them except for one. There's one hearing after the maps. I don't know if it's actually been scheduled yet, but we've been told that there will be one hearing after we see draft maps, and that will be in Raleigh. But we're in the hearing season right now. That's where folks can go to a hearing closest to them. Unfortunately, some folks have to drive over an hour if they want to get there, but that's what's happening right now. And then in October, we expect that that's when the actual map drawing process will take place at the legislature. And then by mid-November, the maps will have passed in order for the candidate filing deadline in December for there to be time for folks to file by that deadline. And just as a reminder, the process in North Carolina is controlled by the legislature. We don't have an independent commission. And what that looks like is there is a Senate and a House committee, redistricting committee, that meets together. There's both Democrats and Republicans on both of those committees. But because Republicans are in the majority in both chambers, they are in the majority on both committees, and they chair the committees. Republicans chair the committees. So they effectively control this process this year. And Governor Cooper does not have the power to veto maps.
All right. So, we're here to try to get people involved in the process so that we can work against gerrymandering. I mean, we're all from North Carolina. North Carolina people probably know about gerrymandering more than anyone else in the nation, but we'll go through those definitions as well. So gerrymandering is basically drawing maps to establish an unfair political advantage for a particular party or group, or a particular individual even. You do this by manipulating district boundaries. And so you can see this graphic here has an example of how that can be done to create districts that have disproportional outcomes. So techniques are cracking or packing are the common techniques by which this is done. So cracking means that you take voters and dilute them across a number of districts to dilute their influence. So if you look in the middle, all the red voters have been kind of cracked out into all these other districts to make sure that their votes are always overwhelmed. And then packing is concentrating a particular set of voters to make sure they get the smallest possible number of districts. And so in the last picture on the right, you can see that's what's been happening to the blue squares. They've been packed into a smaller number of districts to reduce their voting power.
And we think that the most effective way to push back against the impulse of politicians to gerrymander for partisan advantage is to put the focus on communities. The legal term for this is communities of interest. And this is the level of information that the folks who are drawing the maps don't already have. There's not like, you know, a data set on like, here are all the communities in the state. So that's what we really need people to provide during the public comment process is where are the communities that they should be respecting, or they should be keeping whole when they're drawing districts, so that they're not just looking at, they've said they're not going to look at partisan or racial data, but that they may consider community considerations as part of their criteria. We'll put that aside because there's problems with not looking at racial and partisan data as well. But we need to make sure that they have information about where communities are, so that they can keep those communities whole, and they can draw maps that provide the best representation for communities, which is like how we all live, right? So a community of interest when we're talking about redistricting is a geographically defined area, so that you can outline it on a map, where the people who live there share common political interests based on cultural, economic, environmental, or other factors. That doesn't mean they're all of the same party, but it means that they share interests related to how politics works in our state. So, you know, interests around transportation, or interests around whether a plant is allowed to like let pollutants into the water, things like that. That's a community of interest. And in other words, you vote with your community of interest because you share something with them. And it could be a major employer or a hospital that's local to the community, or something like that, that's an interest that the community shares. And you want to think about where is the area that with whom the people there you share common interests with regarding you know, how our government functions. And that's the level of information that's again, that we have, that the politicians don't necessarily have. And even if you're not an expert in redistricting, you are an expert in your community.
So this is a really, I think, potent example that I think a lot of people will be familiar with as North Carolina A&T. So North Carolina A&T is the biggest HBCU in the state, and there were previous congressional maps where it was split in half. So you can see in this line, the red blob is A&T's campus, and it's split right down the middle. And so this is an example of a place where that's obviously a community, right? NCT has a bunch of students, they all go there. It's particularly salient because it is an HBCU, and so most students are Black students. And they clearly have a community of interest in terms of having a real strong interest to vote together. However, they are being split in this map. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a community of interest and how to advocate for it. Is there's sort of a geographically defined area where people have a common interest and it would make sense for them to vote together. And part of the reason why this is so important is that it helps work against gerrymandering on a larger scale. So if you see like the sort of zoom out, it's NCA&T is split, but the whole of Greensboro is split as well. The whole city is being split in half. That's not something that's necessary for population for a congressional district. All of Greensboro could fit in one congressional district, but it's being split in half. And so the way our communities are split is sort of like a symptom or like a precursor of these bigger splits that have really large gerrymandering effects. And so this is why it's so important to be able to advocate on this community level, because we feel that it's one of the strongest things to work against me. So if NCA&T had been split, and if the other communities in Greensboro that were split in this map had been able to advocate for themselves to be kept whole, this line might look really different, and Greensboro would not be split in a way that is so harmful.
Want to take a minute and just talk about the impact that gerrymandering has, like gets to why this is important. You know, examples of the kinds of policy that we get when our state is gerrymandered so that our politicians are just not accountable to their voters. You know, in North Carolina, we've seen the refusal to expand Medicaid, even though it would bring billions of dollars into the state. And without expanding it, we have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people here who don't have health insurance that would if we had expanded Medicaid. And it impacts individual communities directly when you see hospitals closing, especially rural hospitals where people have to drive hours to get to a hospital now. We see it in the funding of schools. There's a case right now that's getting a lot of talk, the Leandro case, about how North Carolina has not been providing a sound basic education for every student, which is in our Constitution, for the past 25 years. And locally, that affects me, that affects my kids, because they're in a public school here in Durham. And if we're not funding our education properly because of gerrymandered districts, that is directly impacting me and anybody else who lives here, really, because if kids aren't being adequately educated, that harms everyone. And then you get things like policy about our environment, about our air and water, including how we're going to deal with climate change. That is instead of being policy that's in the best interest of the people and communities and the voters, you have policy that is catering to large corporations and special interests. So these are just a few examples of how a gerrymandered legislature is failing to serve the people of North Carolina.
So the reason that is happening, the reason that all of these things that North Carolinians support by and large are not happening, is because gerrymandering means that elected officials aren't accountable to the public. They've drawn districts in such a way that they don't have to worry about not being reelected no matter what they do. They get to pick their voters. And so that's why that's why they're able to go against what most of the people in the state want, because they've created a safe space for themselves where they're never going to get voted out because they've chosen what voters they want. So that's why redistricting is so important, because I think we constantly emphasize for people to vote out officials that are not doing, what the people that they're supposed to represent want, but that doesn't work when our system is broken and it's not representing people in the first place.
Yeah, and if you've ever gone canvassing during an election and encountered someone who says my vote doesn't matter when you live in North Carolina, you're like, well, sometimes that feels really true. Sometimes that is true when you're in a gerrymandered district. So, but you can't put out a problem without putting out a solution. And we have a big problem, but there is a solution. And it really is to have this be a focus of people, to have people engage in this process, to increase engagement in the process, and get people to show up at hearings and make public comments, whether they're in person or in the portal, and not give the people on the redistricting committee a moment's peace until they do the right thing for the people of North Carolina. The lawmakers who are drawing these district lines prefer to draw districts that are going to benefit themselves. They want to be able to go, trade precincts here and there, not have people carefully looking at the maps that they're drawing. They would like to be able to hammer out how many Democratic and how many Republican seats there's going to be, to preordain the outcome of our elections for the next decade. But we do have power as voters and as citizens of the state, who know our communities better than the people who are, sitting in Raleigh looking at data. And so we have a right and we have an obligation to do everything we can to ensure that the maps that are drawn this year actually represent our state and our communities. We're going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah, so here are the three things that we think make the biggest difference. First, public input. That's why we're here today, making what we call feasibly mappable public comments, and we will explain what that means. That's what we're here to teach you to do today, but that is one of the best ways to engage in the process. It's one of the ways we think is the most influential to give public input on the maps. Second, accountability. Holding legislators accountable to creating a transparent and inclusive redistricting process. So if you're here at this event, you will get emails from us and updates when we see stuff going on that we think it makes sense for people to engage on and hold people accountable for. So we're going to be monitoring this process really closely, and we will call upon you when we see something bad happening that needs to be pushed back against. And then third, just awareness. sort of getting people in to do the first two things, talking to your network about what's at stake and encouraging them to hold legislators accountable as well and make public comments as well. Those are the three things that we think are really important and the most salient ways that you can resist gerrymandering.
Keep doing that, trying to keep myself muted. So we're here today to learn how to make effective public comments, whether we do it online or in person. And I'm a person and Leika's a person, and all on the line, we are very committed to evidence-based approaches. Like, we want to do something that there's some evidence about what works, right? And we have evidence that certain kinds of comments are effective at actually shaping the maps. This is evidence that we did not have in the last redistricting cycle, but it's based on, like I said, a study. I think I said this to this group, maybe it was the one I just talked to, but there's a study that was based on the 2011 process that studied what kinds of public comments actually changed outcomes. And I don't know if Leika, did you just drop it in the link? So we've dropped it in the chat if you want to take a look at that after the call. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up email that will have all the links that we drop in it. So don't worry if you can't look at the chat or if you don't want to be distracted. We also want to just put in a plug here before we get into this for going and making an in-person comment if you're able and you feel safe. It is more likely to be covered by the news media and picked up, and your quotes, will be put out there for more people to see if you go and can deliver your comment in person. It's harder for the redistricting committee to ignore. They are humans, and when someone stands up and says, a comment from the heart, it's harder to ignore than if you put it in an online portal and they can just choose not to read it or choose to just keep scrolling. Not that you shouldn't do an online comment, but if you can, going and speaking in person is also, I know it can feel, you might have some anxiety around it, but it is empowering for you and more impactful for the audience. I know whenever I have to do public speaking or go and speak in front of people, I always feel really nervous, but then I'm really glad I did it. And also think about the fact that a lot of people are just not physically able to go in person and make comments because their job schedule doesn't allow it. They're worried about COVID. They have transportation or accessibility issues. So if you are someone who can go and make a comment in person, we just want to encourage you to, take that opportunity and know that there will be, 100 people, behind you that you'll be sort of speaking for to some extent.
Okay. So why is public testimony so important? Like Bree was saying, there is some evidence, some actual empirical evidence from an actual study that effective testimony that has certain characteristics can influence the maps that we get this year. They can influence maps that are even when they're being drawn by legislators. It provides some, like a counterweight to some of the partisan gerrymandering. So basically, if there's a lot of testimony from people in a community that they want one thing and the legislature does something else, they can't claim ignorance. They can't claim that they were doing, something that actually made sense for the people who live there. They're going to have to be able to justify what they did. And testimony can go towards showing that there was opposition in those areas to the districts in the way that they were drawn. For example, if there had been a lot of testimony from those NC-A&T students saying that their campus should be kept together, it really undermines whatever narrative that the legislature has to explain their partisan gerrymandering. Relatedly, anything that you submit online or say in person goes into the public record. And, I think we all know that North Carolina is notoriously litigious when it comes to redistricting. We've had redistricting lawsuits pretty much nonstop for the past decade. And if there is litigation, that public record is going to be, it can be used as evidence, right? So if there's a case where something is done to your community that you and others in your area have spoken out against, that can be used in evidence if there is a lawsuit. and under current state court interpretation, extreme partisan gerrymandering isn't allowed. And so that really, taking that into account, if there's counter evidence and they have no other explanation, it could be extreme partisan gerrymandering. And similarly, also, if we are in a situation where we have a special master appointed to draw maps, they can also use information from that public record. And we know that in the past, in successful racial gerrymandering cases, like the cases in 2016, 2017, people's testimony about the way that the racially gerrymandered districts were drawn was really impactful, was part of the lawsuits, and helped them win those cases.
Every time. We've mentioned the study that found what aspects made public comments effective at shaping the maps. And here's what it found. Effective comments were, number one, authentic. They were written from the heart by a member of the community and spoke, they weren't based on talking points or anything like that, but they were authentic and written from the heart. They were feasibly mappable, meaning that they could be, it was specific enough that the map makers could take that comment and apply it to the maps that they were drawing. So they were geographically specific, and they included both very specific what you want the maps to do regarding your community and why you want them to do it, why it will matter for your community. Those were the traits of an effective comment. Ineffective comments used pre-written or canned talking points. They told lawmakers things like, we want you to create an independent commission. Like, that's not feasible now. It might be feasible next time, but it's not going to happen in this process. And so using your time to ask for an independent commission is not an effective comment. Also, speaking for communities which you don't belong to was not effective. It really is most effective to talk about your community where you live. Legislators have said that people who made testimony complaining about the process but not saying what they want them to do instead was not helpful. So if you are going to make a comment about something you would like to see process-wise, again, you need to be very specific. And we want to be giving them instructions so that they can't say that they didn't know what we wanted.
So we're right now, I'm having a mute issue too. So right now we're going to show you a couple of examples of what we think are really effective and good public testimonies, and then we'll go through what makes them effective.
So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for just a second and then reshare it, hopefully, because I think I forgot to click the little share sound button before, so that y'all can hear the amazing testimonies that we have. All right, let's see how this works. Y'all stop me if you can't hear Martha. Just a second.
My name is Martha Schaefer. I live in Guilford County, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad, and I'm a volunteer with All on the Line. My comments relate to the congressional map. I believe the cities of Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem, which anchor the area known as the Piedmont Triad, should be kept together in a congressional district for a number of reasons. We share an airport, an economic development region, a TV and radio stations, as well as a weekly newspaper. We contain large academic healthcare organizations, Wake Forest Baptist Health, which has a hospital in High Point, and Cone Health. We are rich in higher education institutions, including High Point University, North Carolina A&T, Wake Forest University, UNCG, GTCC, and there are many more. Residents commute between these cities, working in one, living in another. We visit cultural sites and go to events throughout the three cities. For example, Greensboro's Triad Stage has a location in Winston, bringing regional theater to both communities. Old Salem is a historic cultural designation for all of our families. Greensboro's network of watershed trails are enjoyed by everyone in the area, as is the Coltrane Festival in High Point. Growth industries in the Triad are distribution, logistics, and aviation, which attract new families throughout the area. So in addition to the special needs we have due to our employment base and our culture, we face the challenges experienced by other urban areas: poverty, food insecurity, and affordable housing. The Triad benefits when we can advocate together to a single representative to address our district's needs. Guilford County has a long history of being split by congressional districts. Frankly, at times it's been very confusing for residents to know who their representative was. In addition to being confusing, it was ineffective. The last time we were split between congressional districts, I think it was 13 and 6, residents in our urban and suburban areas felt our concerns were not heard at all by either representative. No amount of phone calls, meetings, or emails to our representatives produced results. They were attentive to the voices of the constituents in the rural areas, but not to us. The people I was advocating with were frustrated because we were ignored. Democracy wasn't working. But the current congressional map, the one in place right now, doesn't split Guilford County, and it keeps Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem together. It's great. Our voices are finally being heard. So in conclusion, please continue to keep Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem the anchors of the Piedmont Triad region in one district, so we can elect a representative who will continue to respond to our needs. We are recognized as a district, a distinct area in the state, and our congressional map should continue to reflect that. Thank you for listening to my comment and for doing this important work.
Okay, so I'm not a teacher, but I'm going to try a teacher thing, which is to ask you all if you can share in the chat what you noticed. I live in about Guilford County, sorry,
and I'm a member of the League of Women.
I didn't actually change the slide, maybe. Okay, so I want to invite folks to put in the chat if you could look back on, Leica dropped in the chat what makes an effective comment and what makes an ineffective comment. And I want to see if folks can either unmute yourselves if you're comfortable or put in the chat, what about Martha's comment made it an effective comment? Who has an idea? Awesome, yes, Joya. Listing specific locations. We knew exactly where she was talking about. And yeah, Lisa, what was it? The reasons for the cohesiveness. What was it about her community, her area that made it cohesive? She talked about, cultural things that she does, where the hospitals are, how people from all of these communities work in other communities. Yeah. Anything else that folks can? Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Clearly there was a personal connection. She's from there. I don't know if y'all know that, but she actually ran for office from there a couple of years ago. And yeah, Anne put, and you messaged me directly, but Anne put great detailed examples. She talked about the growth industry. She talked about the employment base. She used very specific things that talked about why her community was best kept whole inside of the district and why it should be kept with these other areas as well. And exactly, Melinda told them exactly what she wanted. She wants to see the triad kept together and why she wants to see it. And then also mentioning the, some of the challenges that the area faces, poverty and food insecurity as things that need to be addressed by the representative, and also mentioning that when previous maps where those areas were not kept whole, those issues that she's worked on were not getting, did not get addressed, or she didn't feel like the person who represented them was reacting, was accountable to them. Great. So now let's do one more. And as you're listening to this along the same lines, we'll do the same exercise. So think about, what makes this comment effective. This is a gentleman named Kendrick Cunningham, who is a fair housing advocate and activist in East Charlotte. And he's sharing his testimony as well. And also, let me just note that both of these are longer than an ideal testimony. But for the actual public hearings, the comments need to be 2 minutes or under, and these are a little longer, but we still think that they're great examples. Okay, so here's Kendrick, and please ignore my face at the beginning of this. So embarrassing.
I'm Kendrick Cunningham, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a community organizer with the organization here called QC Family Tree. I live in Kent Green, which is a neighborhood, a part of the Southwest Corridor in Charlotte. This community is located between I-77, I-85, and I-485. Many of the families who live in my community are working families, which means that the majority of us work in the hospitality and logistics industry. There is a majority of us who use government assistance to help stabilize our homes so that we're able to live full lives. We all share concern about the lack of resources that are available in our community. For example, we only have 4 grocery stores, and most of them are not in walking distance to a lot of the other, it's not in walking distance to the homes for many residents who live in our community. And as we continue to increase in population, so does the value of our houses in Charlotte. And many of the people who live in my community are being priced out, and they're facing homelessness and displacement. So it's having affordable housing located within our corridor is extremely important to us. And we're working on becoming a 10-minute community. However, we can't really do what we need to do because we are a dealing rural state here in North Carolina. And if our city wants to make a pathway towards ending exclusionary zoning, we need support from our state legislature in order to get that done. And currently, my community is represented by 4 to 5 different legislators, which makes getting our policy concern heard and affirmed extremely difficult. So in this redistricting season, I would like to see my community, the historic Southwest Charlotte corridor, be protected and only have one legislature instead of multiple legislatures. My community would be better served in our concerns, and we'll have one representative who is held accountable for making sure that our concerns are met. Thank you for taking the time to listen to why I feel that the historic Southwest Corridor in Charlotte, North Carolina should be protected.
Okay. And then also notice that Kendrick has made a community of interest map so that he can submit this with his public comment online or bring a printed copy. And so the committee knows exactly where his community is. And like he said, it's not shown on here, but his community is currently split into, I think it's 3 different North Carolina House districts. So what did y'all notice about that? What worked about that? And also what was different about that one from Martha's? Can folks put it in the chat?
Come on, y'all. You did so good at the last one.
Some of the stuff was the same, definitely from the heart. Yep. Thank you, Anne. It was authentic. I mean, you know, he wrote that. He made a specific ask. He asked to be kept whole inside any district. Yep, he is definitely part of the district he wants. He is from the community that he's advocating for. Yep. Yes, yes. Talked about how his community would be better served by being kept whole and gave some specific examples of that. Yeah, again, very personal. Explain the reasons for what he wanted. I mean, he told a story, and he talked about his community and what the needs of the community are, and he obviously knows his community. Yeah. Thanks, y'all. If anybody else has anything they want to add, is there anything that we forgot to lift up? It wasn't overly rehearsed and it didn't sound, yeah, I mean, I think that goes to authenticity. And also, you know, I think something that's true of both of these is that they're both very good comments and neither of them are perfect. Not, you know, it's okay to go up and make a comment and, you know, not say every word exactly perfectly the way that, you know, perfectionism is not needed in these comments. They just need to be from the heart and they need to clearly say what you want. Yeah, so Jim points out that Kendrick talked about state districts, and that's somewhat harder to visualize than US congressional districts. It takes work to drill down into. That's a really great point. And it'll get to, I think something we'll talk about a little bit more. But what Kendrick did was just talk about his community. And he did make a specific ask, and he was talking about state districts, but he was really asking for his community to be kept whole inside any districts, any state or congressional districts. Because I mean, we don't know where the congressional lines are going to be drawn. So this is one example of a kind of comment that literally anyone in North Carolina could talk about where you live and the area that you consider your community. And it's okay if it's a small area. It's actually helpful if it's a small area, especially when we're thinking about House districts, because those are relatively small districts. And that's another thing thing that was noted in that study was that, you know, when the comments were about an area that was smaller than the district. Am I saying that right, Laika? Am I relaying that right?
Yeah. Basically, the comment is most effective when it's smaller than the district that it's talking about. So for instance, you could talk about a county, but that would probably only be appropriate level congressional districts. Below that, a lot of counties are going to have to be split up. So you might want to think smaller.
Yeah. And just talking about your community, like your local community, is one way to go that anybody could really do. I mean, you can also, if you have specific things like Martha did about, you know, well, it makes sense for me, for my community, my city, my county to be with these other areas. That's it's still geographically specific. You know, it's still totally relevant, but you can also just talk about the neighborhood level, and then you don't even have to worry about which level you're talking about, which level of the map you're talking about. You can just say, this is my community and it should be kept whole under any maps. These slides always kind of make my deck freak out a little bit. What are we seeing on your screens now? Okay, I'm trying to skip past that one.
Okay. You're on the right note.
Great.
All right. So just when you start to draft your testimony, here's some helpful things to think about. So thinking about what your community of interest is. So we saw some really good examples of what that could be. Kendrick had a really nice local example. He, you know, knows what his community is. He knows what that neighborhood is, and he knows what their shared interests are. You know, food, being in a food desert, affordable housing. So think about what issues are relevant to your community and what the geographical definition of that is. And we'll give you a tool if you really do want to go and draw a map, but you can do other things, as long as you're geographically specific. You can say, my community, for instance, I grew up in Southern Pines. So I'd say, okay, the community I grew up in runs along Midland Road, and I would say it ends before you get to downtown Southern Pines, and it should include the hospital that's on the other side of the the main traffic circle, something like that. You don't have to have a map, but you can be geographically specific like that. So think about your community and how you would define it. And then, also you can think about, like we were saying a minute ago, the level of the map that you want to talk about. So obviously we're redrawing all these different maps, and they all have different ideal populations. Ideal population means that that's sort of the population that district is supposed to have. State legislative districts can be plus or minus 5% of that, but that's the size. So for instance, right now I live in Raleigh, and Raleigh proper, I'm not even sure that the whole city can fit inside one congressional district right now. So I need to think about, okay, where are the boundaries of my community, and where do I think the dividing line should be if I think most of the city should be in a single congressional district. But if you live in a much smaller place, so if I am thinking about where I grew up in Southern Pines in Moore County, I might be thinking completely differently. So right now, Moore County is split between the 8th and 9th district, and those districts are really long, and they're paired with parts of the Charlotte suburbs. So if I were thinking about congressional districts and living there, I might say, well, I think that my county should be kept whole, and it should be paired with other Sandhills counties instead of these Charlotte suburb districts. So just think about what's relevant to you based on where you live, and what kind of level of the maps you want to comment on based on, the size of your area. Because, for some people, their neighborhood is going to be super salient. For some people, their city is going to be super salient. For some people, even their county might be the thing that they want to focus on. Just as long as you are geographically specific about what you want to happen, that's the most important thing. But like Bree was saying, we put so much focus on communities of interest and thinking about communities because that's something that operates at all levels of the map, right? Like that's something that's relevant at the congressional level and at the North Carolina House level, to respect those communities and keep them whole, because we know that communities get split in all of those maps.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And so we know that this is a lot of information, and we want to give y'all some time to start thinking and drafting and outlining or writing your comments, so that you can do that, get a little bit of that work out of the way, maybe even get the whole comment written if you're fast. And we want to give you some resources to get you started that you might want to use, you might want to look at or not, that's also fine. But we're going to have a little 10 minutes of a writing workshop now. But first, we're going to drop some links. So one of the things that is really helpful, I think, is looking at the current and past maps of where you live. You can do that on this the NC Legislative website has a tool where you can put in your address, and it'll tell you who your reps are, and it'll also show you your map, show you the current maps. There's also a place on the website, if you go over to the redistricting tab, where you can see past maps. One thing that people ask a lot is, I hear a lot is, well, my maps, my map got a lot better in the 2018 redraw or the 2019 redraw. Or I'm happy with my district, do I need to worry about this? Should I make a comment? And the answer is yes, you do need to worry about this, because the maps are not going to look like they look now. We're going to get a 14th congressional district. We're adding a whole congressional district. That's going to change a lot of lines. Like I mentioned, even Raleigh isn't going to be within its own congressional district anymore. And so the fact that you might like the way the lines are drawn now for your community is basically irrelevant. And also the lines that have been drawn since 2011 have all been drawn based on 2010 census data. So now they're going to draw lines based on the 2020 census data, and that there have been population shifts. So like Wake and Mecklenburg have gained population, they're gaining seats. Other parts of the states are losing seats. So lines are going to shift in a lot of places. So, looking at the maps might be helpful to help you think about, what's happened before or what it currently looks like, and saying what you like or don't like about that. But you shouldn't assume that, where you live won't be affected by new maps. Another resource that we want to share is the tool that Kendrick used to draw that nifty map. It's called Representable. It's pretty intuitive to use. You have to sign up for it and get an account, but it's through the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. And basically it takes 10 minutes to go in, and you make an account, and then you put in your zip code, and then there's a series of questions that you can answer. You don't have to answer every question, but you can put in, start thinking about answering the questions that kind of prompt you to think about what makes your community a community. And then you can go and draw a map of your community if that's helpful for you to visualize or to include in a comment. We also have put together just a doc using we did a series of community mapping workshops over the summer, and we had some maps that we pulled that show previous and current lines, and also some of that is laid over racial data so that you can see how the lines were, they were clearly looking at racial data when they drew those lines. And that document is also in the chat, and we'll include it in case there's maps that are just interesting. I know sometimes people just like to look at maps, but you might find that informative. And then finally, we have a worksheet, which hopefully this link works. It's a short link. Doesn't look like it's working. I'll have to find a better link, or maybe like if you have it handy, you could drop it or I'll find it. But this is just a worksheet that can help guide you through beginning, middle, and end of a public comment, basically an effective public comment. I'll find that if you want to let go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't find the right version. But Bree will drop that worksheet in a minute. And so we're going to give you now about 10 minutes to start brainstorming, planning, or drafting your comment. You can turn off your audio. You can, mute all of us if you want. And if that helps you concentrate. So let's say we'll come back at 5:05. And while you're doing this, please feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat, or if you feel comfortable to unmute yourselves and ask a question about drafting a comment, that'd be great, and we can give some feedback. And so we'll let you all start to work on that public comment, and please ask any questions you need to ask to help you do that. So again, I said we'll come back at 5:08.
And if you want to disconnect from the audio and you don't know how, just to give a quick explanation, it's the little caret that's next to your microphone, your mute button. You can click on that and say leave computer audio, and then you won't hear what's happening in the room. If you want to spend 10 minutes working on your comment, that would be great. We'll be here. Feel free to unmute and ask questions or put them in the chat.
So Anne noticed that in the map resource, Wake County is not there. So these are collected from the community mapping project events that we did over the past month. And we did not do a large event for Wake County. I think we did have a training for Wake County later, but I don't think we got these kinds of maps made for it. Bree, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So there's actually, unfortunately, there are actually a lot of counties missing in this map document currently. I'm going to try to see if we can update it, but I think that we're probably not going to have it updated by by the rest of this week, just because we have to do it through our mapping people. And as you can imagine, they're very, very busy right now. But so if your county happens to be listed on the top first page of the contents, there will be something in there for them. But obviously we don't have all the counties, and I really do apologize for that. We just we were using maps that we had before. You know, I would love to see if I can get comprehensive for people, but at the moment this is what we have. So if you want to look at these districts yourself, you can go to, like we gave you the link, the Find Your Legislators link. You can put in your home address and look at, and that will show you the current district. And then if you go to, I'll find this for you, but if you go to the Redistricting tab on the legislative website, you can find all of the previous maps there to look at. Gracie is asking, do you want us to share our thoughts and comments with you? Bree, I don't know if you can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, we would love for you to, you know, if you want to share the comments that you're planning to make, or I don't know if you mean in the meeting right now. We would love for folks after we reconvene to, you know, share what you're thinking your comments might look like. And if you're comfortable and you want to share them with us, I am, you know, when people send them to me, a lot of folks are sending their comments to us, and I'm just sort of like keeping them so we know kind of generally what folks are advocating for. That's super helpful. That's okay if you haven't gotten comments together yet. You know, I know some folks are going to want to do a lot more sort of like looking at maps and thinking about what you want to say, and that's totally fine too. And also, we will put in the chat before we close, and it will also be in the follow-up email. But there's a link where you can get some time on my calendar if you want to like go away and think about it and look at the maps, and then make some time on my calendar where we can talk about what you want to do for your comment. Anne, did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Hey.
Hi. So first of all, thank you both very much. This is a great training. I think I have friends who in the area, in the Raleigh area, who would really benefit from this. So I'm going to suggest it to them for next Monday or the next Monday. Is that right? The next 2 Mondays? So my question is, I live in Raleigh and I don't really have a defined community except for my teeny tiny neighborhood, which is like 30 houses. So I'm not really sure how to go about doing it for Raleigh, because like you said, Raleigh itself is going to be split up. I can't really say my community is my city because it's such a big city. And I'm just, Leika, you said you live in Raleigh too. I'm wondering where to start in that kind of situation.
Yeah, so I would say even if you live in a really small neighborhood, that's an important community of interest, right? Because Raleigh's so large, we are going to have, I think, 13 state house districts. That's a lot of state house districts in Wake County. And so, and also Wake County has exploded in population. So the lines of those districts are going to have to be really different from the lines that they were, that they are currently. So I would say, I think it's still important to advocate on behalf of the neighborhood you live in, especially because, Raleigh is going to be split up into so many different state legislative districts. And if you don't want your neighborhood to split, I think it's important to talk about it. So I would say that like, even if you feel like your community is really small, because there's going to be such drastic changes in the maps and we just really don't know what's going to happen, I think it's still important to advocate on behalf of that small neighborhood. I also live like in a pretty small neighborhood like that, but we just don't know. Currently we're together in a state house district, but there's been a lot of population growth in this area, so I don't know if that's going to be true in the future. So I think that's what I would say. That's what I would say, sort of in general, is that like that's still applicable and important, especially if you live in a larger city.
Okay. Would you say that it might be more effective to say something like Northwest Raleigh or Southeast Raleigh or Midtown Raleigh or whatever, East Raleigh? I don't know, like a little bit broader than neighborhood?
So I think that, I think we were talking about before about like sort of levels of districts. So maybe on the House district level, it's important to talk about your neighborhood for that level. Maybe for state Senate, or even maybe congressional, it might be important to also mention the sort of area of town you live in. So like I live in Southeast, that's a pretty cohesive area. Maybe I would talk about that for like state Senate or something like that. So I think you can mention all of those things, whatever feels relevant and cohesive to you is sort of what we're trying to get at here. That's the information that legislators don't have. That's the information that we don't have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And another thing that might be helpful is, if you think about other sort of like political districts that might be applicable, if you use that representable tool and make a map of your, whatever you consider your community or just your neighborhood is great too. It'll then let you see the different lines for different communities. And like one that I found is sort of helpful for me is like, the elementary school that my kids go to, that district is what I sort of consider like my community of interest. I mean, it's definitely like my local neighborhood and then some other neighborhoods too, where we all send our kids to the same school. And also like, if I'm going to go advocate at the legislature or go talk to my rep, it's probably going to be about education funding. So like, those are the people that I want kept together in a district. So just another piece of data to think about.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
So we're back. So if other folks have questions, put them in the chat or unmute. Or if you want to share, we'd love to hear if folks have a good idea of what you're planning to say. We'd love to hear that too. Lika, maybe while folks are thinking about that, so there was a question, I got a question in the chat that I wanted to just see if you have any thoughts on, from someone who is out in the mountains in the 11th Congressional District, represented by Madison Cawthorn, everyone's favorite, and just knows that district is kind of gerrymandered, even though it looks very like compact sort of, but it's a huge district, and wondering if there's any chance of that district changing, and what they should say. If you have any thoughts on what would be the most helpful thing to say about
I think
that.
Because for population issues, the district out there are going to stay pretty large. So I think what I would say is you might want to, that might be a case where you want to talk about your county and like what other counties you would want your county to be paired with in a congressional district. That may be the thing that makes the most sense for there, to like advocate for a different configuration of counties out there in the district, because it is, because it is going to be a large district because of like the level of population that's there. So you might want to think about it on that level if you want to see something different.
But that's a good idea. Like I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, there's definitely like kind of groupings of counties out there that like do make more sense together that, than others. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Very useful. What about someone is in Wilson and planning to go to the Nash County hearing? Are there any key points when advocating for that county or at a hearing?
So I would have to look at Wilson maps to tell you anything specific. I know that, Wilson is in the 1st congressional district. I assume that is where at least part of it will still be. And so maybe one thing to think about is what part of the county, or should the whole county be in the 1st congressional district, or should only part of the county? Like what do you want to see in terms of congressional district? That county is going to be very important. I think you all know that is where Congressman Butterfield lives. So like that's his district, and he lives in Wilson. So that's something to think. So I think that's something to think about if you want to. And I know that Wilson, the city of Wilson has been split in previous congressional districts. So that may be another thing to think about.
Great. And we have a question about explaining one more time the connection between education funding and districts. So I'm not an expert, maybe like if but anything more about this, but what I can say about it is I'm not an expert on, how education funding flows, but what I do think is true is that when we are gerrymandered, most people in the state, if you look at polling, think that we should be funding our schools at a higher level than we currently are. I think we should be paying our teachers more. I think we should be, funding education appropriately. And the reason that we're not is largely due to the gerrymandered districts that we're in, where you've got people who are not worried about losing re-election. And that is impacting our funding. I'm not really sure if like a particular, I think there's probably some appropriations stuff around that where individual legislators can advocate for like new schools or infrastructure or things like that might impact the community directly. But that's what I can say about it. I wish I was more of an expert on that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is bring back up what you talked about before, Bree, in that we have this ongoing case, Leandro, which says that our schools are not being funded at an adequate level. And the judge in that case said, gave the legislature, this is what I think would meet your legal and constitutional requirements. And the legislature has refused to meet those standards. Their budget meets 12% of those standards or something like that. So that's one really obvious thing in gerrymandering, is that most people want our schools to be funded at an adequate level if we have representative government, I think they would be a lot more willing to meet the demands of the judge to follow our Constitution with education.
Yeah, and most people are new to this, so don't feel bad that you're new to it. These are great questions, and in terms of Leandro is the name of the case, Leandro. If you Google Leandro, you'll find lots of information about it. Let's see, any key points for Mecklenburg off the top of your head? I mean, at the top of my head, and Leica probably knows more about this, but you know, Mecklenburg is another one that's going to be split because the population is so large that it won't fit within a congressional district. So the question is where it's going to be split. And so that's another case where, like, even just talking about your neighborhood, you can talk about the area where you live, where you shop, you know, the place that you think is sort of a cohesive place that should be kept whole or shouldn't be split into congressional districts. I mean, right now, like I was talking to a woman the other day who lives in the south part of Mecklenburg County, and part of her precinct is in District 12 and part of her precinct is in District 9. And there's really no reason for that except for gerrymandering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most obvious thing, just thinking about what I was talking about earlier from the other side. So I was talking about how Moore County is in a district that's paired with parts of the Charlotte suburbs. And that's what's happening. That's in the congressional map right now. You know, you have the rest of Mecklenburg County is in a congressional district, and there's a chunk taken out of the bottom and put in the 9th district with like a bunch of counties on the other side of the state. So that might be something that I think is pretty relevant. But again, I think, like we said, also Mecklenburg has gained a ton of population. They've also gained 2 House seats. There's going to be a lot of change in the districts there. And so just, especially on the state legislative level, just thinking about, you know, knowing how to advocate for your neighborhood and knowing whether your neighborhood is currently split or not, and whether, you know, and how you want that to look, because of all the growth, the districts are really gonna have to change a lot.
And the reason that little cutout is out of Mecklenburg is because that's where Dan Bishop lives. And that is something that continues to be in the new criteria that they passed, that the redistricting committee passed, just for your information. They are planning to consider incumbency where the incumbents live in the new maps. And even though in the case of congressional districts, people don't even have to live in the district to run from that district. So really the only reason to include that information when you're drawing the districts is to bake in the gerrymandering that's already occurred. But there you go. That was brought up in the redistricting hearing, and the chair's response was basically like, well, it's what we've always done, so we're going to keep doing it. Okay, well, it's 8:18. Any other questions while we're here? We'll go through the I just have I think we have maybe 1 or 2 more slides. Sorry, I was kind of late on turning off unsharing while we were chatting, but we will have a little more time for more questions at the end, I think. We do want to just kind of walk folks through the public input options. Number 1 is, well, not number 1, but there is an online portal. So if you can't make it to an in-person hearing, and I thought oh, it's in the next one. Okay. I do have the schedule of the public hearings on the next slide. The online comment form, you can drop it in the chat if you don't already have access to it. It's very easy to use, and you can make as many comments as you like. You can make your feasibly mappable comment about your community, and then you can also make comments about the process as it goes on, including we would say that the thing to be commenting on right now and also emailing legislators and the committee about is adding public hearings across the state after we see draft maps. Currently, there's only one in Raleigh, and that's really not sufficient. The in-person public hearings, we'll show you the list in just a second. There is if you want to make a public comment in person at one of the hearings, there's a sign up that goes live. That's all the ones for this week. There's already a sign up, and we'll include the links in the follow-up email. You need to sign up to speak. You can do that either online or up to 4 hours before the start of the hearing, or in person when you get there, starting an hour before the hearing. And usually there will be at least a couple of representatives from the redistricting committee will be at each hearing to hear your comments. And there's just a microphone. Most of them are being held, it seems like they're being held in kind of like auditoriums. So it's a lot of space. We'll see how busy the one in Forsyth and Elizabeth City are on tomorrow. The one that they've had so far in Caldwell County was not overly populated, and it was a big room, but definitely wear a mask if you go. And I think anything else we should mention about the in-person, what people might need to know, Leica?
Yeah, I don't think so. Like Bree said, there is a 2-minute time limit. Someone will be there, like they'll have a staff member there who will give you like a 1 minute and a 30-second warning, I think, so you'll know. But if you can, to plan ahead, read your comment ahead of time yourself and make sure that it fits in those 2 minutes. I think that's usually really helpful. That's something that I try to do when I'm in these situations. And also don't be afraid to just show up and sign up in person to give your comment. My experience in Caldwell, at least, was that anyone who showed up to speak and signed up in person and didn't sign up in a line ahead would get time. So don't make that a barrier if you miss the online sign up.
And there are not currently a virtual option for making public comments. You can certainly comment in the portal and let the committee know if how you feel about that, if you feel some kind of way about it. And the hearings are not being live streamed, but they are being recorded, and we'll try to include the links to those recorded hearings in our newsletters. And finally, some next steps. Sorry, I'm going to move this over. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and it will also be in the email if you'd like to sign up to talk with me or Leica, but mostly me because Leica's got a lot of stuff going on. But if you want to sign up to talk with us, I'll drop a link for where you can just grab 30 minutes on my calendar. Lots of folks have done this. It's my favorite thing to do. So please do that if it would be helpful. Let's see. I should go. Someone asked in the chat too about doing a Zoom with a group of folks in Western North Carolina. So we should definitely mention that the next one of these virtual meetings will be a hybrid in-person and virtual meeting, and we will be in Asheville. So if you can get some folks together to come to that one next Monday, either in person or online, that would be great. And I think it's the night before the hearing in the mountains. And so we'll probably be talking more about kind of issues in the mountains. And also we should mention that Leica or I, or both of us, will be at every hearing. This week, I'll be where am I going to be? I'm going to be in Winston-Salem tomorrow, Durham on Wednesday, and Alamance County and Graham on Thursday. And Leica will be in Elizabeth City and Rocky Mount on Wednesday. Elizabeth City tomorrow, Rocky Mount on Wednesday, and
Greenville.
Yes. Oh, and there's a great question in the chat. Thank you for asking. How do you add pronouns to your display name? That is a great question. If you go to participants on your little menu there, and you click on that, you should be able to find your name, and then click on more and click rename, and then you can name yourself whatever you want, including adding your pronouns, which we encourage you to do. Let us know if you have questions. Okay, and then so as far as our next steps, we'll finish this slide so that folks can go. It's almost 8:30. We'll drop the link again to the portal, and then let's see, to the online portal. And this is all going to be in a follow-up email, but probably not for like an hour because I'm going to go eat dinner. Thanks, Luca. And then also, if you would fill out a quick survey, a quick feedback form, it's not a survey, just to let us know like what worked about this and what didn't work about this. Feel free to tell us what you liked about it. We love hearing when things worked for you, but also really if there's like something that you'd have liked that would have made it better for you, that's really helpful, and we will incorporate that feedback. So thank you for doing that. And yeah, any other questions? I think that's it. Great. I'm glad folks are finding it helpful. Awesome. I'm gonna, does anyone want me to leave the screen up because you're looking at this tiny little, also, if you have not been on our list before, or if you're not getting a weekly newsletter update from me, you will now. So check your spam though, because sometimes our emails go to the spam folder, and if you make me like a trusted sender or whatever, then you'll get them, and we'll be updating weekly at least during the heat of this process to let folks know like what's going on and if there are things that we need people to do to advocate. And also we'll probably be doing some Facebook lives like daily when things get
yeah, I
more.
think once we're not traveling so much and things are happening at the legislature, we'll do a lot of live updates.
Yeah. All right, lots of opportunities to see us.
Yeah, so really, if you're coming to any of the in-person hearings, please come say hi.
And to the person who asked about the Zoom in Western North Carolina, if that Monday doesn't work for you, let me know and we'll see if we can work something else out, depending on when your folks are available. I think, let me just put my email in the chat. If you could email me, that would be super helpful. My email's in the chat. And also I'm going to send out that follow-up email and you can just reply to that. Anybody's welcome to do that if you want to touch base or set up a time to talk more. That'd be great. Okay. I think that's everything. Got 3 minutes to spare. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here and for making public comments. It's really important. Thanks for spending your Monday night with us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.